Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to our session on cricket in Pakistan, nation identity and politics. It is my great honor and distinct privilege to be in conversation with Dr. Ali Khan today. Dr. Khan, I'll briefly introduce him and then we'll begin the conversation just in terms of what to expect. We're going to have a moderated conversation for about 45 minutes. And then I want to open it up to the floor because I'm sure there'll be questions. And after that, we'll have a book signing outside. Dr. Khan's latest book, Cricket in Pakistan, is available and he'll be signing copies. Dr. Khan is Professor of Anthropology and Dean at the Mushtaq Ahmed Jermani School of Humanities and Social Sciences at LUMS. That is the Lahore University of Management Sciences. He's got a number of research interests from child labor to popular culture, especially cinema and sports, and a number of books to his credit. Tonight, the book that we're discussing is his latest monograph, which is Cricket in Pakistan, Nation, Identity and Politics. Dr. Khan has an MPhil and a PhD in social anthropology from the University of Cambridge. And I am so delighted to welcome him to the NYU Abu Dhabi Institute. Please put your hands together for Dr. Khan. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Saba.
So I want to start kind of on a personal note because you're somebody who's watched, played, and written about cricket extensively. Before we get into the book, talk a little bit about where this interest, this personal interest in cricket arose. And I want to link that to a broader question, which is, cricket kind of took on a life in the subcontinent like other English sports didn't. So talk a little bit about how that came about along with your personal interest. Maybe we'll start there.
Yeah, I think the personal interest is kind of important because I think the deeper you go into an academic career, the more you're able to follow those personal interests, which may not have been the case earlier on in your career. So I've sort of managed to do that now, but the personal interest came very, very early because I had two elder brothers and a father who was a fanatic cricket fan for many, many years. And as you know, my father was also in the Foreign Service. So one of the most important things for us when we would go to a new posting, to a new house, was to see two things. One was that did it have space outside for you to have a cricket net? Yeah. And the second was, did it have a room inside where we could play indoor cricket? So these two things were far more important than what the house was like, much to the disappointment of my mother. But I have to credit my father really. He also played cricket quite at quite a high level. He was a club cricketer in England, as were my brothers. So we all sort of went into it in that way. So I grew up in a household like many Pakistanis did actually. Where cricket was, the most important thing. Again, I refer to my mother who constantly complained that it was like being married to a cricket bat because, that's all that was happening is, waking up at odd hours of the morning to hear the commentary from Australia or whatever. But, there was that interest right from that point. And then, sort of moving on to why it was that South Asia took such a liking, an affinity to cricket, is a really good question, I think. And it's a question that isn't an easy one to respond to because, when cultures come into contact with one another, as an anthropologist yourself, you'll know that some traits diffuse easily, others don't. And sometimes it depends on the different cultures as well. So cricket is a very good example. Yeah. It diffused immediately to the West Indies, to Australia, to South Asia, but it didn't to the United States and Canada. And there are reasons for that also. But in the case of South Asia, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka particularly, part of the reason was that they used the elite. So the princes were civilized in the image of the rulers, and therefore they had to play cricket. And they also wanted to dabble in being part of this elite circle. So they took to cricket as a result. Now, because the elite took to cricket, they then wanted to emulate the colonial masters. So they then involved the lower middle class and middle classes into the game itself. So it worked really well in South Asia, where you've got quite a hierarchical society in this manner. And each hierarchy was involved in the game. It also meant that people who were on the lower end of the hierarchy had, in this form of a game, the ability to compete, which otherwise they wouldn't really get the opportunity to do so. So there's some mobility there available to them, some ability to compete with otherwise people that they can't do so. So actually, I think that the social structures in South Asia did help in doing this. And then from that foundation, I think the game took off. You had huge tournaments prior to partition, what was known as a quadrangular and the pentangular later, where you had ethno-religious teams, Muslims, Hindus, Europeans, Parsis. You had these four groups that would play the quadrangular, and then there was another team called Others that joined the pentangulars. So you had upward of tens of thousands of people prior to partition already watching it. So I think that's where it all sort of stems from. And then, I think that's where it really comes from.
Yeah. And so your latest book, Cricket in Pakistan, seems to say that if you want to understand Pakistan beyond kind of the cardboard cutout headlines, looking at it through the lens of cricket could be really valuable. The good, bad, the ugly, and it's a bit like Brazil and football, really. Yeah. And in one of your interviews, you put it so well, because you said you see resilience, audacity, invention, and youthful exuberance, but you also see corruption, greed, poor leadership, and unfulfilled potential. Talk a little bit about viewing Pakistan through the lens of cricket and what this might reveal about the country.
Yeah, I mean, for a long time, I had read books on Pakistan which tend to concentrate on, unfortunately, negative aspects such as terrorism or the growth of religious extremism. And I felt that this was an area where there had not been enough attention paid. Sport is so important to South Asia. In fact, to many of the colonies, some of the most important heroes that ex-colonies have, Australia to Pakistan to India to the West Indies, are sports people. And the fact that no one had explored that was, to me, a bit of a, why haven't we done that? And the second reason that I thought it was important was because, where I would look at what was happening in cricket, and I would see that reflected in what is happening in the country. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So, early on, around the time of partition, it was believed quite strongly that Pakistan was not a country that could survive. Right? There were many, many things that were working against it. You had, up to 1 million people losing their lives. You had 20 million people moving between the countries. Enormous dislocations that are happening. We know that prior to partition, most investment happened in the non-Pakistan side of the Indian subcontinent. So we didn't have industry, we didn't have resources. You lost a Hindu businessman, you lost Sikh financiers. Muslims were already not really in a position to fill that gap. So at partition, very few people actually thought that this was a country that was viable. You had one wing over there, one wing over here. So it was really not a viable project. And yet Pakistan survived. And not only did it survive, but it has had periods of stability and prosperity. Difficult as it is to understand that now, but there have been periods of stability and prosperity in Pakistan. And that's why I talk about resilience. And that's why I talk about the fact that this is a country that astonishes and astounds, right? It shouldn't be where it is. And if I now apply that to cricket, so come partition, you don't have a cricketing structure in the country. Right? There's no cricketing structure. There's no what you call first-class cricket going on. And yet, this is a country that in its first ever tour wins a test match against India, right? The second test match that they ever play, they win it. This is a country which 2 years later, in its first international tour to England, wins a test match, right? It would take India 20 years to win their first test match against England. It would take New Zealand 26 years to win its first test match against England, right? So you have this kind of audaciousness that is part of Pakistan that continues to astound. And yet there's a dark side to it also. And that dark side is that having done all of this, there is enormous potential in Pakistan. Right? There's enormous potential in the country. You look at tourism, you look at the products that are available, you look at the natural produce that is available, you look at a youth, a huge youth population. There are many things that should be tapped into, but have not been. And for a variety of reasons, which include things like leadership, but corruption and nepotism, the country has fallen well short of where it should be, right? And similarly in cricket, you've seen what corruption has done to the Pakistan cricket team. You've had match fixing, you've had other issues that have gone on. And were you to have arrested that negative development, I think you would have had far greater results for both the country and for the cricket team as well. So, this is just one example, but that's what I was seeing is that, wherever I see the corruption, I see the nepotism, I see how damaging that's been, I see how instability and insecurity have impacted both the country and the team.
Yeah. And staying on the team, how might you describe the Pakistani team that on any given day, and in the book as well, is called mercurial or unpredictable? Talk a little bit about that.
I think it's a little bit of a contradictory statement. And I say that because, in a way, you can't get away from the mercurial nature of the Pakistan cricket team. But at the same time, you need to bracket that by saying that there are specific reasons for that particular nature. Those of us who know cricket in Pakistan know that in 1992, Pakistan won the tournament having almost exited in an earlier stage. We also know that in the previous iteration of the Champions Trophy, similar things were happening, and we had a very heavy loss against India and then came back to win the final when no one expected you to do so. So you tend to go from extreme to extreme. It's, I think, like I wrote in the book, that the poem by Longfellow, where the girl with a curl, who when she's good, and when she's bad. Like I said, I think that there are specific reasons for that. I mean, one of the reasons is that as Pakistan's cricket developed after partition, it moved away from schools and universities. The first generation of post-partition cricketers were really people who came out of universities or school systems. And as a result, they had the benefit of coaching. And sorry, that will sort of give you a foundation in the game. Now, as the game spread, you began to get a lot more people from outside of university and school and the middle classes. It spread to smaller towns, much more remote towns. And the cricketers that began to emerge from these outposts really learnt their cricket in what we call is the Maidan, which is kind of dusty plains, without any supervision, without any coaching. It also coincided with a phenomena which I think I saw sort of developing in the 80s is the development of what is known as tape ball cricket, where you actually put an electrical tape around a tennis ball and you play in the street. Yeah. And it really caught on like wildfire. But again, it was frantic and chaotic and without any sort of rules and regulations and coaching. And so you begin to get, cricketers emerging who have this amazing flair and flamboyance, but it's an extreme case. They'll come off. It's high risk. Yeah. It's very high risk cricket as a result, and as a result, it's like sink or swim really. And I think that began to happen more and more. So you have these sort of rough edges, but you don't have the coaching in place. And I think that's where part of the mercurial nature comes from. It also, I think, stems from the fact that there is so much instability in Pakistan, and I think in the cricket, where you've got so many changes happening that I think that works against having a kind of steady improvement, which you would see in other countries. So I think there's a lot of churn at the top, which just doesn't, it doesn't work for having a more kind of measured improvement. Instead, you get this. I think, finally, we have tended to, I think Pakistanis like to look at themselves as flamboyant, and they like to, show off a little bit. And I think, therefore, we have always gravitated towards cricketers who are able to do that. So you will always have younger people wanting to play like Shahid Afridi, but not like Misbah ul Haq, who was much more sedate, or Yunus Khan, who became Pakistan's highest test scorer, but was much more sedate. We want to go for the flashy. And as a result, I think there's this thing of being mercurial. One other thing that I will say is that it is a stereotype. It doesn't mean that it's not true, but it is a stereotype, because as soon as you give stability, your results begin to be much more sort of, they have a trajectory which is much more even. So it is a stereotype because, over two periods where you had one captain, 6 years and 6 years, Pakistan was at the top of maybe 2 or 3 countries at the top under Imran Khan, then later with Inzamam and Misbah ul Haq. You had results that were quite consistent. But like I said, where you have that insecurity, then you're up and you're down a lot. And let's face it, that stereotype is there for the West Indies as well, where everyone said, oh, these are calypso cricketers, they're flamboyant, they go out and play in a certain way. But that hid the fact that when the West Indies were dominant, they were dominant because they played that way, but they trained harder than any other team. And that was not part of the stereotype. So no one ever brings up the fact that there was an enormous professionalism in the West Indies team of the 1970s. Similarly, I think India, 70s, 80s, was basically seen as a team of gentlemen players. They didn't have that aggression at the time. So these stereotypes tend to develop over time. And I think they are overplayed a little bit, but there is certainly some truth to them.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because it's hard to talk about Pakistan, to talk about cricket, and to not talk about Imran Khan.
Yes.
Right? That's difficult. and the 1992 World Cup, which we won. Now, we had a good team, a really good team in the 70s as well. There were the likes of Zahir Abbas,
Yes.
Majid Khan, but we didn't sort of go out and win a World Cup or, you know, those sorts of tournaments. What do you think it is that Imran Khan did differently to convert a not so great team, you know, these so-called cornered tigers, into world champions?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really, I mean, it's a good question. And I have to give due credit to Imran, but I will take it back a couple of years before that.
Yeah.
And say that Imran Khan was, I think, deeply influenced by his previous captain, Mushtaq Mohammed, who was, I think, the watershed for Pakistan. I say that because I think that there was, in the 60s and 70s, prior to Mushtaq and then prior to Imran Khan, a tendency for Pakistani teams to turn up, perform well, and that was enough. Right? So you could make 100 or you could get 5 wickets or whatever. Oh, we've competed with England, we've competed with Australia. But, you know, I mean, if you didn't win, you still competed.
Yeah.
And I think there was, you know, if you're playing elite sport, you can't do that, right? You have to be in a state of mind that does not want to lose. And I think that that generation of the 60s and 70s were not players who were attuned to that. There was, in a sense, you could put it in a way that there was a kind of inferiority complex that we're not really going to be able to win. Or put it as a lack of confidence in your own abilities. So Mushtaq Mohammed, I think it began to change when Pakistani cricketers began to play in the English counties, where they suddenly realized that there was a lot more competitiveness. And then soon after that, they played in a breakaway league called the World Series Cricket, which consisted of some of the best cricketers across the world playing in this league, a bit like IPL, but much earlier. And that was very, very tough cricket. And a lot of Pakistanis played there. They were banned by the Pakistan board, but they played in those leagues. And I think that really, really toughened them up. This is in the late 70s now. It really toughened them up. So I think that, by the way, interestingly, no Indians played in WSC, the World Series Cup. And I think that's where they lost out, because I don't think they had that same level of competitiveness at that time. Yeah. So I think it started from there, but then it was Imran who really brought this, you know, I don't want to lose. And I think he was, you know, he honestly felt, I think, that, you know, and I think a lot of countries that were ruled by Britain at one time felt that this was an avenue to show that we can compete and we are as good as our former colonial masters. And I think Imran felt it very acutely. And he made his team gradually, I say gradually because in 1982, you still had the superstars of the 70s playing. But he gradually made the younger people coming into the team believe that they could win. And I have to give him credit for this. There was no insecurity in anything that Imran Khan did. He had this adamantian belief that you could pull it off. And I think as an elite sportsman, you need to have that belief. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do it. So to infuse that into the younger generation of cricketers, and you know, anyone who's played sport will know that someone who has a certain stature comes to you and says, you are going to win this. It entirely changes your attitude and the way that you approach a game. So I think that is what he changed. And I think one other thing that comes to my mind is that, you know, so the 70s, you had a series of big superstars along with Imran Khan. Unfortunately, I think there was a tendency, and this tendency is overlooked too often, for them to undercut one another. And again, it's a team game. Cricket is a team game. And if you undercut one another and you play for yourself, at the end of the day, the team is not going to prosper. And so as they phased out, and he dropped his own cousin, and his cousin didn't speak to him for 10 years after that, he phased them out and got a new crop of kind of street fighters. And I think that is what changed the attitude of the team in the late 80s and 90s.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about mismanagement and corruption when it comes to the Pakistan cricketing story. So in the 90s, for example, we could have perhaps won more tournaments, but we got affected by a number of match-fixing scandals. So there was the Salman Butt incident, there were allegations against Wasim Akram, Waqar Yunus, etc. What do you think led us to be susceptible to this sort of, this sort of unethical behavior in a sense, and what impact did it have on Pakistani cricket?
Yeah, it was. So this is a dark chapter, really, in our history. So I think tracing this match fixing issue, you have to trace it back to 1983, when India wins the World Cup in England. So we're still having World Cups only in England. India, against the grain, defeats West Indies, and they win at Lord's in 1983. And that Indian team doesn't have the financial resources to celebrate except at a fast food joint. That's what they do after they win 1983. But once that happens, India actually finds they have a relatively good team. They win another tournament in 1985. The World Cup comes to South Asia in 1987. We get it again in 1996. So what you're seeing is a movement of focus from England and Australia to South Asia. So all the focus, all the commercialization is now happening in South Asia. So there's a lot of money that is coming into the game in South Asia. Now, money attracts all kinds of people. It goes a step further for Pakistan because we win in 1992. And all of a sudden, these cricketers are showered with the kind of attention and gifts and money that they had never seen before. Keep in mind that because we've got such commercialization, you do have now the involvement of criminal gangs who see this as an opportunity. And they are based in Mumbai, in Karachi, later in Dubai. This becomes a triangle where a lot of this betting is based. So the first thing is the commercialization. There's a lot of money comes in, a lot of criminal elements come in. And I remember that Kapil Dev, the Indian captain, after 1983 actually says, okay, look, I'm really concerned because my team doesn't seem to be interested in cricket anymore. They just want to go to these functions to get freebies. And it is, the same thing happens for Imran Khan. 1992, post-World Cup, he is now phasing out, so he wants to raise money for his cancer hospital. The team agrees that they'll give half of their dues to that, and they go to these various places. Then they decide, no, we want it all. And they actually abandon Imran on the stage and leave in one of the functions because they are upset. And there's kind of conspiracy that goes on amongst the other players saying that we want more. We won the World Cup, we want more. So, from commercialization, I would very openly state that there is greed that comes in to this. I mean, suddenly they're huge stars. I mean, it takes 15 hours to go from airport to wherever they're tap begins to shut. I mean, how long are you going to keep the 92 thing up? And then you start wondering, where else am I going to keep getting this money? it's also unfortunate that at that very time, Imran Khan, as a mentor, important leader, retires. So you've got a vacuum, and you've got these young guys who are superstars. They want to continue getting all these, all these financial rewards. And what is the next way that you can do this? And it happens for us through this match fixing. I think so. There is greed involved. I think there is also, you've got to keep in mind the insecurity of sport, which means that any time your career could end with an injury, and it's not a long career as it is. It was easier for someone like Imran Khan from a well-off household to sort of be above it. But for many of the players who are now coming in to the team, financial security is something they've never known. Some of these boys come from, very poor households, children of night watchmen or railway guards, or, so they've never known that financial security. So there is an element of that. But I say an element because it would be wrong to say that, it's because they're poor that they did this. And that isn't the reason, because a lot of those that you see who are involved in match fixing were very, very rich. Very rich or well off. Hansi Cronje, who was one of the first South African, extremely rich man. Mohammad Azharuddin, at the time the richest cricketer, then became involved in match fixing. Salman Butt, you mentioned, from a middle class family, became involved. So it's not only the fact that, it's greed. There's also an element of what I refer to as envy. So greed and envy are emotions that I think proliferate where you have inequality. And at this time, cricket is becoming unequal. And what Pakistani cricketers increasingly see is that they get paid less than others. I think the numbers that I had more recently is that, the top people get in excess of $1 million. The top Pakistanis get around 74,000. So, locally it's a lot of money, but suddenly I see the other person is getting so much more than me. Suddenly I see I don't have an IPL contract. And if I did have one, I'd be set for, even if I got injured tomorrow. Suddenly I see I'm not able to play cricket at home anymore. And all of these kind of grow within you to you start saying that it was okay for me to do this. It becomes a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy then. So I think there were these reasons: the commercialization, the criminal elements, the greed of some individuals, the envy that was generated by inequality. These were the reasons why I think, and very, very much the case, poor mentorship. You had, in one case, you had a captain who was doing this, right? Who started this, and let's not, you asked, how did it affect Pakistan? It affected us because we felt that we had been shown up in front of the whole community, right? So it affected a lot of Pakistanis. But should it have affected us when you're one of the most corrupt countries in the world, right? Everywhere else there's corruption. Everywhere else. If I want to go to a school, I have to pay a bribe. If I want to go to a hospital, I have to pay a bribe. If I want an electricity connection, I have to pay a bribe. So why should we be so surprised that cricketers should not do this, but the rest of us should be allowed to do this? And that normalizes it, right? I remember a cricketer actually saying to me that, well, what's the harm in fixing a match? The audience doesn't know it's fixed. Right? So it just normalizes this wrongdoing in society. So I think it is important for us to keep in mind that the environment is also creating this kind of situation.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about, on a positive note, bringing cricket back into the country, and the book deals with this so well. And of course, the upcoming Champions Trophy is on everybody's mind. And in the book, you write that, you know, a decade without cricket has changed things significantly. And now at the PSL matches, like, crowds are sort of cramming in. And there's this one part in the book which I found so striking, where you talk about this banner at one of the matches in Multan. And the banner reads, "This is not Sultan against Zalmi. This is Pakistan against terrorism." And I found that to be really powerful. And of course, you know, then you go on to say that there was this fervent desire to look at the country in this modern global order, and, you know, as a country that's bounced back after a decade and a half of ruin, in a sense. So talk a little bit, and in the interest of time, I'm going to club this with my next question, because whilst that's good news, we also see India not playing its matches in Pakistan for the Champions Trophy, and politics kind of getting mixed up into sport. As an anthropologist, you know, obviously that breaks my heart, because in an ideal scenario, sport is supposed to unite and not divide. So sorry, there's a lot we're talking about here, but talk a little bit about that banner, you know, and what it symbolizes, or just bringing cricket back in. And then a little bit, if you can comment on the India element, and kind of with the Modi government there and all of that, everything that's happened.
Yeah, so I think amongst the most, I said that Pakistan is a resilient country, but amongst the most difficult things that we had to deal with was the 2009 attack on the Sri Lankan cricketers. Because, you know, we've been through everything, but when you lost cricket, it drove home the level of isolation that the country was suddenly facing. And I don't think we've ever faced that level of isolation. So it was an enormous blow, which I don't think people appreciate how difficult it was. Immediately after that, you also lost hosting for the 2011 World Cup that we were supposed to co-host. So it really was a difficult time. And it wasn't a time that, you know, passed over in 2 years. For a decade, for a country not to have been able to play cricket at home, and here we come back to the resilience, and yet survive, and yet keep cricket strong, and yet in that time win a T20 World Cup and the Champions Trophy is astonishing. But it was a very deep cut, that 2009 event. And so when you began to have the first steps to cricket coming back, it suddenly uplifted the country. You know, just like when Pakistan wins games, it palpably lifts the mood of the country. The first steps towards bringing cricket back to Pakistan lifted the country in a way that I can't remember, actually. And that was really, really important. I think that also in that 10-year period, Pakistanis have become acutely aware of the fact that how we are viewed, right? And unfortunately, like I mentioned at the start, it's always negativity in the sense that there's terrorism here, there are extremists here, they lock up their women. There's hardly any positive news that comes out of Pakistan. And so and credit has to be given to the PSL here, the Pakistan League, which is how step by step cricket started coming back. It began to generate a few positive stories. And people started to come back as a result. And that generated more positive stories. You had foreign players playing in Pakistan after a decade. You had foreign audience coming in. And then you had, you know, Bangladesh. I think Sri Lanka was the first team to come back. And you could palpably feel how thankful people were to those PSL foreign players who came. And to the teams who then came to Pakistan, because we felt that they were helping us reintegrate into a global society. No one likes to be the pariah. I think Pakistanis are very sensitive about how they're viewed. we want to be viewed positively. And I'm reminded of this survey that took place, which was looking at the most handsome head of state. Everyone knows what I'm going to say. It's not Donald Trump. So Imran Khan came up, and people were so happy, and I'm just thinking, why is this the case? Why is it important that he? But it's just that you want to be looked at positively. And Imran Khan, for whatever, good and bad, was a way that we wanted to be represented. And that's why I think that cricket coming back was and continues to generate the few positive news bites that come out of Pakistan. And now, to put a damper on that, in 2008, the most positive thing coming out of cricket, international cricket, was the rapprochement between India and Pakistan. And we had played several series at that time. And what has happened since then has been international cricket's most difficult period, and continues to be so. I think it's very, very unfortunate that India and Pakistan are not playing. And, I think there are reasons for it. But I think at this moment, I would put more blame on India, because I think they have to make the first. I think Pakistan has tried, but at the moment, and again, there are reasons for this, India is unwilling to help out Pakistan's reintegration. And it impacts Pakistan cricket, it impacts international cricket, and I think it impacts our relations hugely. And we all know where we are at this moment.
I've got two last questions, and then I know that there's going to be questions from the audience. I want to leave time for that. But my second to last question has to do with women and cricket. And in the book, you say that possibly the unlikeliest inroads that cricket has made has been in the women's game. And yet, as more women enter this, there are more dangers, and we see some of the stereotypes, as you write in the book, from Pakistani society mapping onto the game, onto this traditionally male-dominated sport. And specifically, Dr. Khan mentions this one incident in 2014 of a young female cricketer who alleges that the chairman of the Multan Cricket Club, who also happened to be a member of the Provincial Assembly, demands sexual favors in return for putting her and 3 other girls on the regional and national teams. And that's why I especially wanted to bring up this question. Talk to us a little bit about this sort of problem, and also the women's game clearly doesn't garner the same eyeballs and visibility as the men's game. So where do things stand?
So, I mean, there are a couple of points to be made here. One is that it's an unlikely success story, right? I mean, I think if you were to say 10 years ago that Pakistan would have relatively competitive women's cricket team, I don't think I would have believed that would happen, because there was opposition initially to women's cricket. Opposition across society, not only from religious elements, but also from just men who thought that this is a men's game and women should not be involved in it. So there's a lot of opposition. And, the efforts of, I think there were 2 sisters who really pushed the game, who really patronized it, who gave the equipment, and, no one was helping them basically, but, got together, ragtag group of women and began to play. So to move from there to a point where you are part of an international setup is really, it's a big achievement. And I think that it's not given enough credit, but this generation of women cricketers has been phenomenal. They're not one of the best teams, because they don't have the resources that India, Australia, and England particularly have. But they have beaten India on occasion, which was, brilliant for them. And they've also been path breakers. You know, they've made a name for themselves. They are prominent. They have become role models for other female sportswomen. So I think, you know, that is, you know, it's incredible that they've been able to do this. There's actually a book that's written on women's cricket in Pakistan by all people, by an Indian author. And I remember speaking to him, and it was, you know, this is why when we talk about how we are connected. He contacted me for a Zoom interview on women's cricket, and I said, oh, you know, you're sitting in India, you're doing this. And he said, I was so interested in it. So, you know, cricket brings together people from across borders. So, you know, that is also there. I would hope that it is sustainable, because, like I said, they continue not to get the kind of support that they should. And I think part of that is because men's cricket is just so dominant, right? It's not only women's cricket, but it dominates hockey, it dominates squash, it dominates every other sport. So women's cricket is a long way down there, and therefore they tend to get overlooked. I think the problems, if we come back to the reflections of society in cricket, well, women are facing these problems as mobility increases, as they go into spaces that are more male-dominated. You will run into these very, very unfortunate issues. I have no doubt that is what happened, even though the case was dismissed against the member of the Provincial Assembly. These are the problems. You'll also have occasionally a young woman cricketer retire because she's got married and is not allowed to anymore. But at the same time, you have others who come back after having children and play and are supported. So, you know, there are certain areas of optimism, but certainly we need to be aware of how society looks at these.
Yeah. My last question relates to the conclusion of the book, which I hope you'll read when you buy it. In the conclusion, you know, there's this really poignant part, and I want to share that with the audience. But, you know, you write about how in March 2020, the England and Wales Cricket Board recommended that all forms of recreational cricket should be indefinitely suspended in light of the pandemic. And I'm going to read a couple of lines from the book just to give you a little flavor of it. It said, all the world over, cricket came to a standstill. At the same time, in Pakistan, the majestic Mughal-era Badshahi Mosque was closed off because of the pandemic. In its shadows, boys continued to play that beloved game of bat and ball, once English in body and spirit, now the lifeblood of Pakistan. And, you know, that just really, it gave me goosebumps, because I just felt like, you know, yes, of course it is the lifeblood. We're a cricket-crazy country. There's a level of fanaticism. And I kind of want to bring us full circle to where we started and say, why is it then that, or let me ask you, are we seeing that level of talent being unearthed, that kind of leadership being groomed? What's the status now, and how do you see things going forward? And then we'll open it up to the floor.
Yeah, so, I mean, recently I was asked to write an article on the decline of sport in Pakistan. Because as I was mentioning to you earlier, in the 90s, Pakistan held the World Cup for hockey. It had the World Cup for cricket. We had dominance in squash that is unsurpassed. And yet all of those three areas, cricket to a slightly lesser extent, but certainly hockey and squash have collapsed. And really the reasons are the same. The reasons are that we have not invested in institutions. We have had periods of progress when individuals have come to sort of oversee progress, and those individuals have been good. They've been excellent administrators. In South Asia, there's always been a tendency of centralization of power, which is a hangover from colonial times. But That centralization of power means that when you get someone good, you can get rapid progress, and that has happened. But equally, if you get someone who is incompetent, then you will go back very, very quickly. But in both of these cases, a lot depends on the individual. And without any structures, as soon as that individual goes, you begin to slip back. So you see that in Pakistan itself also. You have not invested in what is important. You have not really, I think, the insecurity and the instability that is inherent in the country right now means that we look at everything in a short-term manner. Right? If I come in, I know that I'm only going to be in government for anywhere between 1 to 3 to 4 years. We don't finish terms. Now, if I'm only there for 1 to 4 years, all I'm going to do is to do what I can in those years for myself. There is no long-term planning. If you look at Pakistan cricket in the last 2 years, I'll finish with this, we have had 3 changes of captain. We have had 4 changes of chairman. We have had 8 chief selectors. Multiple other officials that have changed. Now, if you have so much change going on, how are you ever going to make a strategy? Right? Everyone comes with their own strategy. Everyone comes with their own people. Everything is short term. And you have all this potential. The potential is still there. But I'll give you an example. You're getting now what is happening in Pakistan cricket is that the best years of a Pakistan cricketer's lives are when they join the team. Everywhere else, people join and they continue to improve. In Pakistan, you join, you're good, and you decline because you just don't have any idea what's going to happen tomorrow. Am I going to be in the team? Am I not going to be in the team? Is he going to be captain or is he going to be captain? Is he the chairman or is he the chairman? So with that level of instability, you can't nurture talent. And that is the same instability that you have in the country itself, right? Why are we not progressing as we should be? Because we don't have that investment in education or health or polio eradication or building up relations with your neighbors. It's just like a staccato. Everything changes every few years. And that leaves you at a point where you had a lot of potential, but you're running on empty. And that is the scary part of it, is you're running on empty. No one knows where you're going. So the talent is very much there, but nurturing it has become critical.
Thank you.